Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe, and our guest today is Simon Bransfield-Garth, the CEO of Azuri Technologies. Simon, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure to be here.
Well, Simon, the pleasure is all ours. You are doing something that I admire, I quite frankly love. I'm excited about what you're doing in bringing solar technology to households in Africa. This is just great, inspiring work, and it's fun to see you making money at it. So give us just a little bit of an overview of what you're doing, especially in Africa.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess the background is for all the development that we have in the world, still roughly 20% of people still have no access to mains electricity. And that's particularly true in Africa, where about half the people in the continent don't have access to electricity. So you've got this really strange situation where pretty much everybody's got a mobile phone, which is 20-year-old technology, and yet people are using kerosene lamps that, frankly, the pharaohs would have recognized for lighting. So what we're trying to do is to use solar power coupled with mobile phone technology to enable people to get access to electricity and pay for it as they use it. So if you or I put solar power on our roofs, essentially we have to buy our own power station, and that requires capital. People in emerging countries generally don't have capital. And so by offering solar power as a service that replaces kerosene and mobile phone charging fees, so people can get access to power, save money, and bring themselves closer to the knowledge economy.
Now, one of the things you mentioned, and I just want to drill down on this a little bit, was that you help people sort of move up the ladder. I imagine once you use a little bit of electricity, you want a little more, and then a little more, and a little more. Is that what you're seeing, and how do you facilitate that?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. It's interesting when you set companies up that sometimes the very earliest decisions turn out to be the most important. And traditionally, people will always charge you for the amount of substance that you use, be it electricity, water, whatever it may be. Because with solar power, the cost of an extra bit of electricity is zero, instead of charging people for the amount of electricity we use, we charge people for the amount of time they have access to it. So typically somebody will pay $2, $3 on their mobile phone, and that will give them access to solar power for a week. And the kind of unintended but actually very fortuitous benefit of that is there's no point in conserving solar energy because it's free, it has no impact. So people tend to use it more and more, get more and more reliant on it, get more and more benefit from it. And then with our solution, after 18 months, the customer owns the product. So it's essentially a rent-to-own type of business model. And what we thought was that people would kind of stop at that point. But in practice, what happens is they give away the old one, and then they say, right, I want the next one now. I want the one that's got more light, or it's got a rechargeable radio, or it's got a torch or a TV, or whatever it may be. And so just in the same way as you or I upgrade our mobile phones, so people aspire to ever more technology and ever more capability.
Yeah, and you're bringing it to them. That's really interesting. And I guess that gets it. You gave me some really interesting observations about your work in Africa. And one of them, your first, was that aspiration is the same regardless of income. Tell us a little bit about what you see in Africa as you work with folks.
I think when people think about Africa and the sort of the image that is widely portrayed is very often of doom and disaster and things going wrong. And I guess the other image is this idea of people who are in receipt of benefit, charity, and so on. And yeah, absolutely nobody is knocking the activity that people do and the great work that people do. But realistically, on the ground, individuals are the same as you and me. They want a big house, they want a car, they want good things for their family, they want their kids to have a good education, they want to have a good retirement. And so what we tend to feel is it's much better to view the people we're working with as customers, as consumers, and provide the services and goods that people are looking for on a commercial basis in a sustainable way, and try to get away from the perhaps slightly patronizing sort of view that sometimes has occurred in the past, and just really treat people as individuals in their own right who have aspirations and want to get on.
Yeah, great insights and observations. You know, most of us haven't spent nearly as much time on the ground in Africa as you have, and so we appreciate those insights. Now, your second point was that it's not just California where you find tech innovation. Tell me a little bit more about what you're seeing in Africa in terms of tech innovation.
So this is something that I think is really exciting. And there's this phrase, reverse innovation, which is sort of coming around, which is that when you lack infrastructure, it provides an environment to allow people to do things in really exciting and unusual ways. So, for example, we're seeing people using drone delivery to deliver vaccines in Africa because the roads get washed away, and so people are unable to get around the place. The most recent tech innovation in Africa was the mobile phone, and Jeffrey Sachs will say that the mobile phone has had more impact on the development of Africa than all aid from all countries over all time. But really, that was still an example of old technology, in as much as it was developed first in the West and then it found its way into Africa. Really, the first example, I think, of reverse innovation was the mobile money, which we're seeing, particularly started in Kenya and then come in other places. So within Kenya, 40% of the country's gross domestic profit goes through one particular mobile money service. I mean, just tremendous access to mobile banking in a way that just simply doesn't exist in the US or Europe or the rest of Asia.
And most of us wish it did. We'd like to be able to send money as readily as they can.
Well, exactly, yeah. And so what we're beginning to see is the same thing applying to energy. So rather than using sort of old technology and developing it in the West and then eventually it filters its way down into emerging markets, we're going the other way around, and we're using the very latest solar panels, the latest battery technology, the latest LED technology. We're using adaptive smart metering, we're using cloud computing, big data, all of those things in order to create a product that hits a price point that is right for the African consumer. So, simple example, in our solar home systems, we have adaptive smart metering, which I guess you have in some houses in the West, sort of Nest type of devices. But actually in my kitchen, when I go and switch the lights on, I basically got 2 bits of wire and a mechanical switch. And that technology hasn't changed for 200 years. But I got all this advanced technology in a $50 solar home system in rural villages in Africa.
Yeah, that's just really exciting to see that. Now, I want to jump to a related topic, but it seems to me that the near future will involve microgrids in Africa. Do you see yourself getting involved with that in small village projects rather than single home projects as more and more people use more and more electricity?
So we're not quite so sure about microgrids. What we find is that there are 2 components to cost in a grid. So there is the cost of generating the electricity in the first place, and there is the cost of wiring up the consumers. And when you've got a reasonably dense population, then grids and microgrids and so on, they work just great. But actually, Africa has a population density on average of about 5 households per square kilometer. And so it's very quickly the case that it is cheaper to put in a standalone power system than it is to connect the customer up. So typically, connecting a customer up to a pre-existing grid costs about $1,000. Well, for $1,000, I can not only provide the power, but I can also provide the TV and the light and the smartphone and the fan and the mobile phone charging and the radio. And realistically, for many people, that's as much as they would expect to use the grid for. And so in many, many cases, we're seeing that distributed power is actually a genuine alternative to the grid for many households. And of course, it's much quicker. You can roll out distributed power with the dynamics of consumer electronics, whereas rolling out grid technology is the same dynamic that you have with any utility. It takes many, many years.
Yeah, interesting discussion. Well, it is just fascinating to think about this idea that we're completely upending our concept of electricity. Since we started using electricity commercially in the 1880s, we had massive power sources that distributed that to urban areas, and then over the next 60 years to rural in the United States. But to think about powering each home and having that be more efficient is just a really pretty big departure from our traditional thinking, isn't it?
Absolutely so, and it's really turning things on its head. But if you think about how the mobile industry developed over 20 years ago, for the vast majority of people in Africa, their only access to a telephone is going to be on a mobile phone. Their only access to the internet is going to be on a mobile phone. They will never see a landline, and they're never going to miss it. And our view is there's a significant number of people who will never see the grid, and they're never going to miss it. Because you look at the dynamic of the market, the cost of a piece of wire is pretty much static. It's not going to change rapidly. But the cost of consumer electronic devices, be they efficient TVs, efficient lighting, efficient fridges, all of those sort of devices, that cost is coming down. And so the gap between what you can get as standalone power and the cost of connecting people up is growing all the time.
Yeah, very, very exciting. Well, I want to just ask you a couple of personal questions, Simon. As a social entrepreneur, I'm always intrigued with what drives social entrepreneurs. So you become a role model to many. Who do you look up to as a role model?
Wow. So there are many, many people, of course, that you think of, and some of the more obvious ones. I actually think that there's one that's kind of stands out as unusual, and that's Florence Nightingale. And the reason that she's a role model is because she took something that, medicine in the Crimea, and she applied science to it, and she applied data to it. And as a result of bringing some structure to it, she was able to develop things in a way that frankly were sort of quasi-random beforehand. And I think this idea of the application of data and the application of processes to problems which otherwise are just seen as being just difficult is really, really important. And particularly for Africa, I think there is a real opportunity to use data and use information to allow the continent to develop in a way that all other continents have not really benefited from. Really simple example, if you think about continents that have gone through their growth phase, Africa is the first one to go through its growth phase in the context of the internet. India didn't have it, China didn't have it, but actually Africa has. And so the interesting question is, can we change the path of development in the African subcontinent and not necessarily follow the path that's occurred in other continents historically?
Yeah, interesting idea. Now, Simon, I want to ask you as an entrepreneur, you could be doing anything. Why have you chosen to pursue solar power in Africa as the centerpiece of your new business?
So I've run many companies in my life, and some of those companies I've sat there and thought, well, when I get to retire, I'll look back on this and actually I won't feel particularly proud of what we've done. I think it's clear that this is an environment where you can look back at it and you can say, yeah, we're a business, yeah, we're trying to make money, but actually we're creating employment and we're genuinely having an impact. And I look at just simple stats like, on average, when people get a solar light in their house, kids increase the amount of study they do every evening by between 90 minutes and 2 hours. On average, a household will increase its productive day by between 2 and 3 hours every day just by having proper clean lighting in the household. So the impact you can have is tremendous. And the problem is much bigger than us, of course, but at least we're playing a part in contributing to that development process.
No, that's great. And you certainly are playing a part. Now, we like to ask every one of our guests for what we call an impact hack, a tip that would help us do more good in the world. What's yours?
So I think the one that I have is really about, well, actually there's two things. One is inherently I try to trust people. So step one is assume that people are trustworthy and allow people to make decisions by themselves, because the more you can distribute decision making, the better. I find is really important. And the second one, and this is something that you can particularly do when you don't have too large an organization, is as far as possible keep openness right across the organization. So a really simple thing that we have that I actually learned from Texas Instruments when I worked there many, many years ago is everybody writes a weekly report of 1 page, and everybody sends that to everybody else. And that way you don't have to have long staff meetings because everybody knows what everybody else did. And it's a tremendously productive way of getting information around the organization. But it also forces everybody to think critically once a week. Well, actually, what did I achieve last week? And it almost becomes competitive for people to be able to show what they've managed to do inside that last week. So that's something that we've used, and it's been very effective.
No, that's a great insight. It sounds not too dissimilar from the Amazon model. Jeff Bezos is famous for demanding memos to reduce meeting time. So that's great. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Before you go, tell us how people can learn more about Azuri Technologies.
So just come to our website, azuri-technologies.com. A lot of information on there. And please get in touch with us through our website. We'd love to hear from you.
Fantastic. Well, Simon, we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. We wish you every success in lighting up Africa, and look forward to following up with you soon.
Thank you very much indeed. It's been a great pleasure.
All righty. Let's do some good.